All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on storytelling itself. We're going to explore one of the most mind-bending ideas in all of literature. What actually happens when the people inside stories realize they're not real? So, to kick things off, let's just chew on this wild idea from the writer Jorge Luis Borges. Imagine you spend all this time and energy dreaming another person into existence, piece by piece, only to have this horrifying realization that you yourself are just a figment of someone else's dream. That unsettling, world-shattering thought, well, that's exactly where we're headed today. I mean, think about it. That one question just blows the doors wide open, right? The moment a character awakens, what kind of powers do they suddenly have? What is their first reaction to this unbelievable truth? Do they fight back? Do they just give in? Or, and this is where it gets really interesting, do they try to grab the pen and write the story themselves? For most of us, reality feels pretty solid. But just try to picture this for a second. You get this creepy, nagging feeling that your choices aren't 100% your own. That every big moment in your life, the good and the bad, isn't really fate. It's just a plot point. For some fictional characters, that exact feeling is the start of a massive awakening. Okay, so let's actually meet some of these characters who've woken up inside their own narratives. We've got a whole rogues gallery here, starting with the ones who just flat out refuse to play along. So, on one hand, you've got your typical character. They're like a puppet on a string, just going along with the story. But then, you have the rebel. Take Yao Lang and Lu Gao, characters from the Chinese author Ma Yuan. These somehow figure out that an author named Ma Yuan is controlling their lives. And their reaction? Oh, it's pure defiance. They actively fight back against the very story he's trying to write for them. But then you can take it a step further, and you get the prosecutor. See, these characters don't just want to rebel. They want justice. In Flann O'Brien's amazing novel, At Swim Two Birds, the characters get so sick of all the terrible things their author puts them through that they literally stage a coup. They wait for him to fall asleep, and then they put him on trial for his literary crimes. Can you imagine that? They're litigating against their own creator. And this might just be the ultimate power move of all, the successor. For these characters, waking up means it's time for a hostile takeover. In some of John Burt's work, the book ends with the main character literally picking up a pen and starting to write the exact same book that we, the reader, have just put down. They don't just break the fourth wall. They own it, becoming the author of their own reality. So you have characters who can rebel against, sue, and even replace their authors. Obviously, this isn't your typical story. So what in the world is this strange genre that doesn't just allow, but actually seems to encourage its own creations to wake up and fight back? Well, the answer has a name. It's called metafiction. And really, it's the art of the story that knows it's a story. To put it simply, metafiction is fiction that gives the audience a little wink. It drops the whole "this is real" act and openly says, hey, you know this is all made up, right? But it's not just a gimmick. It does this to really dig into that blurry, fascinating line between the world on the page and our world. And metafiction is so much more than just a clever trick. It's a tool for asking some huge questions. The hero's quest isn't for a magical sword. It's a quest to understand what it even means to be a story. It basically takes the engine of storytelling apart to show us how it works, and then it turns around and asks us, hey, you know your reality? Is it maybe built the same way? So of course, if you've got characters waking up and stories that are aware of themselves, this completely changes the game for the one person who is supposed to be in charge of it all, the author. Remember Ma Yuan, the author whose characters were rebelling against him? He had this brilliant description for writing. He called it dancing in shackles, and that just captures the tension perfectly. Yeah, the author has control, but they're also bound by the rules of language, of genre, and sometimes by the will of the very people they've created. What you see is this really fascinating evolution. The author can start out as a god, pulling all the strings from on high. Then they might become a kind of ghost in the machine, their voice just popping up in the middle of the text. And sometimes, if things get really wild, they lose all control and become just a helpless spectator, watching as their characters completely hijack the story. So if the author's power can fade away and the character's power can rise up, this big space opens up right in the middle. And that space It gets filled by the final and honestly the most important player in this whole game. You, the reader. See, when a story admits that it's a story, the spell is broken. You're not just passively watching things happen anymore. You're forced to think about how they're happening. It's like you're not just in the audience of a magic show. You've been invited backstage to see how all the tricks are done. You become a collaborator. And this is where it gets really deep. By showing us exactly how a fictional world is built, out of words and rules and conventions, metafiction holds up a mirror to us. It forces us to see that our own reality is also a kind of construction, a story we all agree to believe in, shaped by the language and systems we use every single day. A character in one of John Barth's novels absolutely nails it. He says, "The truth of fiction is that fact is fantasy. The made-up story is a model of the world." In other words, stories aren't just an escape from the world. They're blueprints for how we understand it. They're the frameworks we use to make sense of everything. And that really leaves us with one last big thought. If metafiction teaches us anything, it's that we are all authors, in a way. We're all actively building the reality we live in, moment by moment. So the question isn't just what happens when characters wake up in a story. The real question is, what kind of world, what kind of story are you going to choose to build?